to Tech Active paper for the multiple choice. Now, a lot of people said this paper was pretty hard from what I heard. But what we're going to do today is just go through each of the questions step by step and show you how I would answer them and what resources I would use. Now, particularly this is a calculator exam, okay? Tech Active. So we most likely are going to be using a lot of our calculator for some of these questions because multiple choice questions don't take too long, really. Obviously, there's some that take a bit longer, but generally you want to be using your calculator for a lot of them. Now, you do need to have your specialist formula sheet. Now, this is the new formula sheet for those who still have the old one. Make sure you're using this one here, okay? The most updated version of it, because it has all the stuff you basically going to need for specialists overall, okay? Alright, so let's get straight into the first question here, okay? So, question 1. Rounded to the nearest degree, an angle equivalent to arctangent of 2 is. Okay, well, arctangent just means tan inverse. Okay, so when they're saying arctangent of 2, they're asking you to calculate what is tan inverse of 2. Now, you cannot do that by hand. I don't know anyone that could do that by hand. So you have to chuck that into your calculator. Now, make sure you're in degrees. Why? Because your answers are in degrees and it says it in the question, okay? So if someone does this in radians straight away, they're probably going to get the incorrect answer. So when you put this in your calculator when it's in degrees, it gives you about 63.434. If you do it when you're in radians, though, I'll show you what it gives you. I'll just chuck it in. It gives you 1.10. So here, a lot of people will be like, okay, it could be A or B pretty much. No, that's if you're in radians. You have to be in degrees for this. Super important. Now, 63.43. Most people would be rounding that. Now, because it is below 5 here, you have to round it down to 63. Because remember, it says to the nearest degree. 63 is closer to this than 64 is to that. Really simple question, yet a lot of people will lose a lot of marks here, okay? Don't lose marks here, okay? Alright, question 2. Now this one here, I actually think is quite an unfair question because it doesn't get taught properly a lot. So, when it says which unit vector product is correct. Now this is to do with the cross product. So if you have two vectors, so if you have vector A and you have vector B, if you cross them, you'll get a vector perpendicular to it, okay? Now, if you cross them the opposite way, you get the opposite vector. So negative A crossed with B gives you the opposite direction vector. Now, this is very particular with a lot of these. Now, I'm glad they put it as a multiple choice here, okay? So straight away, they're talking about I, J, and K. That's what you can see in these questions here. So the I is the unit vector in the positive x direction. J is the unit vector in the positive y direction. And K is the unit vector in the positive z direction. Okay? So draw yourself a 3D axis here so you know exactly where they're situated. Okay? Now, first of all, when you cross two vectors together, you get a vector. You do not get a number. So A and B are incorrect because they've crossed two vectors and they've given you a number. That is not true. You only get a number if you dot vectors together. If you cross them, you get an actual vector. Now, a lot of people would argue both of these answers are correct. So if you you go vector, let's just write this out. So that's J. Oh, that's I. Very similar A. Okay. So J, positive, I, positive, and K, positive. So a lot of people would argue, okay, if you cross J and I, so if you cross J and I, that gives you that vector there, because it is perpendicular. Wrong. It's only these guys the other way. So if it's I cross with J, so if that comes first, it gives you positive K. If it's J cross with I, it gives you negative K. Very sneaky. Okay, so the order matters here. So this is actually incorrect, even though it looks correct if you just know they cross and give you a vector perpendicular to it. Okay. Now the reason why we can say perpendicular is because on the x, y, z axis, x, y, and z are all perpendicular to each other. Now this means this is the only correct answer, and this makes sense. J crossed with K does give you I. So if we looked at it from that perspective there, we have J crossed with Z gives you that vector there, and that is true. But that is a sneaky question. A lot of people would have gotten that wrong because they wouldn't be able to make the choice between C or D, and probably the only way they got it right was by a guess or by some miracle they remembered this stuff here. Okay? Alright. Don't forget this stuff here, okay? You learn it in... Oh, actually, no, you do only learn it in year 12. You do vectors in year 11, though, but not cross vectors. Okay, question 3. Now, also, if you have any questions about any of the questions I go over today, leave a timestamp in the comment section, and I'll try my best to answer you, okay? Alright, question 3. If all roots of the equation z cubed equals 1 are plotted on an argand plane, and then joined by straight lines, the shape formed is... Okay, so... when we solve something like this here, okay, all of the solutions are going to be sitting on a circle with the radius of this thing here. So the radius here is 1, okay? So that's 1. Now, all the solutions have to be on this circle here, but they have to be equal distance apart. Now, we know one of the solutions to this would be 1, okay? So that's one solution there. Now, the other two have to sit on the circle, but they have to be equal distance apart. So what you do is you ask yourself, okay, what's a circle's angle? Okay, 360 if you rotate it. Divided by 3, so the distance between each of the solutions has to be 120 degrees, because 360 degrees divided by 3 gives you 120. So there has to be a distance of 120, so your other solution's up here, and your other one is down here. Now remember, these have 1, 1, and 1. Okay? So that means that distance there is the same as that distance there, and is the same as that distance there. Okay? I've just drawn it really badly. We can see it as a triangle, but what type of triangle it is really important. It is a equilateral triangle because all the sides are the same. Okay? Everyone would try and make the argument, okay, what about these other ones here? No, that's not true. You just have to draw it properly. Now, you don't have to solve all of these guys here, but you could probably do it in your calculator if you wanted to, okay? But to be honest, you actually don't need a calculator for this question if you know what you're doing with, like, this general idea here, okay? So, this one here, if you need any help, I would probably just send a comment underneath here, or you can just send me an email and I'll respond to you, okay? Alright, let's take a look at the next one. Question 4. The expression 9 times 2 to the power of n plus 1 plus n to the power, 2 to the power of n, where n is a positive integer, is divisible by. Okay. Now, what would you do in a situation like this? Okay. Well, first of all, you would just chuck in n equals 1 into this equation here, and see if any of these options, if you divide it, gives you a whole number. Okay. So chuck n equals 1 into this expression here. So we have 9 times by 2 to the power of 1 plus 1 plus 2 to the power of 1. Chuck that into your calculator. So you have 9 times by 2 to the power of 2 plus 2. This gives you 38. So we're asking ourselves, okay, do any of these numbers divide well into 38? And if not, we have to look at the next number, n equals 2. Okay, so 38. Divided by 10 gives you 3.8, which isn't a whole number, so that doesn't work, okay? Now, what about 11? 38 divided by 11. That doesn't work either. 38 divided by 18. That doesn't work either. But, what about 38 divided by 19? That gives you 2, okay? So 38 divided by 19 gives you 2 exactly. So this is the only correct answer. And as soon as you find 3 incorrect answers, you don't even have to check the last one because there has to be one correct answer, okay? But what I did here is I checked, okay, 38 divided by 10, 38 divided by 11, 38 divided by 18. And if it doesn't give you a whole number, then it's not divisible. Now, the reason why we checked n equals 1 is because this is the start of some sort of induction question. Induction goes n equals 1, n equals k plus 1. So you need to be aware of those steps in order to make that justification on how to answer a question like this, where it's not a straightforward induction, okay? So, the correct answer here is D. Now, most people wouldn't have answered that question because they wouldn't have known what to do, because this isn't your typical style induction. You're not even proving anything. You're just after what thing is divisible here. Okay? So you have to make that leap of faith of like, okay, let's just try n equals 1. And you should know this means positive integer. Okay? If you don't, you need to look at induction a little bit more. Alright, question 5. So, just judging by the first look of it, you're probably going to need your calculator, okay? So, the height centimeters of people in a certain population is normally distributed with a standard deviation of 7.42 centimeters. A researcher takes repeated random samples of 15 people and calculates the mean height for each sample. The expected standard deviation of the distribution of this sample's height means would be approximately. Okay, so when we have a population, we have an average, which is your mean, which is mu, and you have a standard deviation, okay? When you take a sample, you then have a sample mean, which is x bar, which is actually the same as that, but the standard deviation of the sample is the standard deviation of the population divided by the square root of your sample size. So when it says the expected standard deviation of the distribution of this sample means height would be approximately, what they're wanting you to do is calculate this here. Now you don't have to memorize this. It is on your formula sheet somewhere. I just gotta find out where it is. Oh, there it is. Right there. Okay? Even says sample means. So there's no excuse as well. Okay? So you go find it. So here, what they've given you is that is your standard deviation of the population. Okay? Because it says population here. And they've said 15 people. So the standard deviation of your sample would be 7.42 divided by the square root of 15. And you probably have to shove that into your calculator to get your actual answer. Okay? So let's see what we get. Divided by square root of 15. Okay, so this gives us about 1.915. Okay? So if we were to round that roughly, the closest answer there is most likely going to be B. Okay? Now you can probably answer that question quite well without a calculator if you're pretty good at like stuff like this, but a calculator definitely helps because all those numbers are relatively close. If you struggle with this question, you need to look at normal distributions in a bit more detail, specifically, okay? Because you do normal distributions in methods, but we extend on that a bit more in specialists, okay? Alright, let's take a look at the next one. So, question 6. Determine the gradient of the tangent to y squared equals 4x when y equals 1. Okay. So, whenever you see gradients, you need to think dy dx. Okay, if you do not think dy dx, you need to be looking at it a lot more, okay? So, now here, y squared equals 4x. We can't differentiate that normally, but we can do it using implicit differentiation, okay? So, we need to create an expression for dy dx of this relation here. So, what you do is you differentiate implicitly, and the way you do that is you differentiate with respect to x on both sides. So we go y squared and we differentiate the 4x here. Okay? Now, when you differentiate something implicitly, you treat this as a chain rule. So this is your quote-unquote outside function, the power of 2. So when you're doing chain rule, the chain rule means differentiate the outside, multiply by the differential of the inside. So the 2 would come down the front, so you'd have 2, your inside function, to the power of 2 minus 1, times by the derivative of your inside function. Now, in this situation here, the inside function itself is y. So this is y, and we're multiplying by the derivative of y with respect to x. So, just to keep it short, if you're differentiating y with respect to x, just treat it like any normal differentiation and shove a dy dx right next to it, okay? That's the easiest way to think about it, but for deeper understanding, think of it as a chain rule, okay? If you don't understand that, you need to look at implicit differentiation, okay? Go study that and then come back to this video, okay? Now, the right-hand side is quite easy. That just turns into 4. So you have 2y dy dx is equal to 4. Now, they said determine the gradient of the tangent when y equals 1. Well, that basically means we need a number. Now, we've got an expression for dy dx. So what we'll do is we'll get dy dx by itself. Divide both sides by 2y. So you have 4 over 2y, which you could write as just 2 over y. So if you want the gradient when y equals 1, you just chuck y equals 1 now into that expression. So you get 2 over 1, which gives you 2. Okay? So the answer here is B. Okay? Now, could you have done that with your calculator? I believe some calculators can do it. My one doesn't, so I always do this by hand here. However, it gets more complicated. You can probably use some sort of software, okay? So like even graphing this thing here and then sketching the actual tangent on your software could also work quite well for you guys, okay? Alright, if you have any questions about that one, leave something in the comments and I'll try my best to answer it. Alright, question 7. Given the complex number z equals CIS negative pi over 2, determine arg of z of 6. Okay, so whenever you see arg, just think angle, okay? Now, it's not the angle of z, because that would be negative pi over 2. It's the result after z of 6. So z equals CIS negative pi over 2. So when I'm looking for z of 6, I'm raising this thing to the power of 6, which is where you can use de Moivre's theorem. Okay, so de Moivre's theorem states you can move this 6 to multiply the angle and add the power of 6 to that thing there. So it's 1 to the power of 6, CIS 6 times by negative pi over 2. Okay, so that's z of 6. So z of 6 is 1, CIS, and what's that going to be? 6 divided by 2 gives you 3, so you have negative 3 pi there. So the angle, so arg of z6 would be negative 3 pi. Okay, so the correct answer here would be D. I don't think you need a calculator for this question here. I think that's quite straightforward and there's no heavy calculations here. This is probably the trickiest part about it, maybe. And maybe de Moivre's theorem here, but I don't think you need a calculator for that. But if you do struggle with something like that, you need to look at de Moivre's theorem specifically with complex numbers. To apply this idea quite well, look at roots of unity as well. Okay? Alright, now if you have any questions about that one, you're welcome to leave something in the comments. Let's take a look at question 8 now. So question 8. Consider the plane that contains both the x-axis, the y-axis, a sphere, consider a plane that contains both the x and y-axis. A sphere centered at 3, 4, 6 touches this plane. The length of the radius of this sphere is. Okay, so let's kind of draw this out. Okay, now this is where a calculator would be very useful because you could almost graph this thing here. However, I'm going to be drawing this for understanding here as well. So 3, 4, and 6. So the center is roughly here. Okay, 3, 4, 6. Now, if you need to work out the radius of this thing, they've told you this information here. Okay, so the x, y axis is this. Oh, that highlighter is not going to work that well. Let's use a pen. Let's go red. Sure. Okay. So this is the axis we're talking about here, okay? Now, the main thing I want you to notice is the only distance between the center of that sphere and that plane there is this, okay? Because that's its height. So that distance there to there is 6, okay? Now, they've said, consider the plane that contains both the x and y axis. A sphere is centered at this, and it touches this plane. Now notice they said it doesn't cut through. So that means it like just touches it and it's like this here. Which means that's the edge of the sphere. Which means the distance from the center to the edge is 6. Which means the radius is 6. Okay? So the correct answer here is D. Okay? Now we're using a calculator that can be quite easy to do. However, you have to still be able to imagine this spatially as well. It's just as important, if not more important, because what if they give you this on a non-calc exam? Okay. Now, the main question here, how we notice this, is the fact that they said it contains both the x and y axis, and the sphere touches this plane. If they used cross, then it would go through it, but the fact they said touch means it only touches once, because they haven't specified anything else. Okay. Alright, let's take a look at question 9. So, The masses in grams of a random sample of 40 chocolate muffins. Okay, so we're talking about samples, so you want to probably be looking at this formula again. So the masses of a random sample of 40 chocolate muffins produced by a local bakery are recorded. Using the sample standard deviation of 0.845 grams, an approximate confidence interval for the population mean mass of chocolate muffins is produced by this bakery is this. Okay, the Z value used in this calculation is. Okay, so let's understand what a confidence interval is. A confidence interval is basically calculated from this thing here. Okay, so basically it is a bar of data in which you're confident your sample mean lies. So this is your sample mean. This directly here is the length of your confidence interval. Now don't be fooled by my bad drawing. It's exactly the same on both sides like this. Okay, I just made that even short, not longer, shorter. There we go. So that length there is Z, and this is also that there. Okay, so this value is X plus Z, standard deviation over the square root of n squared, and this here is X minus that there. So that's your max and min. So that number is that guy there, and that number is that guy there. Now that makes it really easy for us here because it allows us to be able to calculate the mean as well. Now they've said a random sample of 40 chocolate muffins. Okay, they've given that for a reason. Now this wording here can be a bit confusing. So they've said using the sample standard deviation of this. Well, what does that actually mean? Is that the actual length or is that the standard deviation? Because that can be understood as well. So what I would do first is I would actually work out what the average is to better understand this question. And the way you do that is you pretty much add these numbers together and you divide by 2 to find that midway point, which is your mean. So I would add 150.12 and I would add 149.68 together and divide by 2. Okay? So 150.12 plus 149.68 divided by 2. This gives you 149.9. Okay? Now, in order to go from 149, so if this is 149.9, and let's just fill in this information now with the data they have up there. In order to go from 149.9 to 150.12, you do need to add physically the amount they've given up there. So if we were to basically work out that difference there, what you'll notice is this actual physical distance is not the same as that guy there. Because if that were true, it'd be a lot bigger than that. So literally, if you go 150.12 and you minus 149.9, that gives you 0.22. So that's the length of the confidence interval right there. Okay. Now, in this particular situation, this is the wording that I would base it off. They've said sample standard deviation. So sample standard deviation means this itself is equal to 0.845. Okay. A lot of people would go 0.845 divided by square root of 40. Okay. You actually don't need the 40 here because they've said the sample standard deviation of using a sample standard deviation of 0.45 grams. They've already calculated that. Okay. Now, I can understand why people would use square root of 40 on the bottom, but that is actually just incorrect. Okay, based off this wording here. If they have something else, then they've used the incorrect wording here. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means this. Okay. Well, we know that 150 plus 150.12 is equivalent to 149.9 plus the z-score times by 0.845. So you can solve this equation for the z-score. Okay, so if we did this, we'd have 0.22 equal z times by 0.845. Okay, to get the z by itself, I would actually divide by that thing there. Okay, now when you do that, what you'll notice is basically you get 0.22 over 0.845, which gives you, what does that give you? 0.845, 0.26. And that's none of the answers there, okay? Which means basically one thing, okay? They've actually worded this question incorrectly. So what they should have said is basically, of a random sample of 40 muffins, standard deviation of that. Because they've said that is a sample, I'm assuming actually that is the standard deviation of that guy there. They want you to do divide by the square root of 40, but the way they've worded that is actually incorrect. So what I would do here is, okay, let's say we use the 40 there, okay? I don't agree with that wording there, but based on that calculation there and their answers, what we calculate is actually very different to what they actually have there. So from an exam point of view, I would actually go the other way now, just to use this stuff here. So 0.845 divided by the square root of 40. Maybe that will make it a little bit easier. So let's try that now. So 150.12 minus 149.9 gives you 0.22. So 0.22 is equivalent to Z 0.845 over the square root of 40. I would then try and get the Z by itself by timesing both sides by the square root of 40 and simultaneously dividing by 0.845. Okay, so 0.22 times by the square root of 40 divided by 0.845 gives you a Z score that's approximately 1.646, which matches that answer there. Okay. Now that's probably going to be the correct answer, but their wording here is actually very incorrect here. So what I would do in a question like this is I actually would solve it how I did the first time based on their wording there. But what you'll notice is because it's a multiple choice and I didn't get their answer, I'm not going to just make my own answer here. I'm going to readjust my calculations to think, okay, maybe they've worded it incorrectly. Let's try and answer it how they've done. What they should have said here is a standard deviation of the muffins. The fact they've used sample can also be interpreted that is the sample right there. But what they're actually trying to say is this is equivalent to 0.845, not what I first assumed, which was this here. Okay, hopefully that makes sense here. I'm going to keep that in the video because I think that's important to address in real time. Okay. Alright, if you have any questions about this one, you're welcome to send me an email as well, but also leave it in the comment section below, okay? Alright, question 10. Consider the solid of revolution formed by rotating the curve y equals sine x about the x-axis. Determine the volume of solid revolution. Now, look here, okay? They've given us where it cuts off, okay? Now, volumes of solid revolution. You get given a formula for that right here, okay? So about the x-axis. So basically we have to have it in terms of x. So volume about the x-axis pi a to b of y squared dx. Now because y in this case is sine x, we just need to know where we're doing it from. Now because we're going from 0 to pi over 2, we just need to effectively calculate the integral pi 0 pi over 2 of sine x all squared dx. And I would just chuck that straight into my calculator. I wouldn't do like it by hand because that's just going to waste a ton of time in the exam. Okay. Please make sure you are in radians though. Okay, that is a necessity. So let's calculate what we get here. Okay, let's do that. So we get roughly 2.467. Okay, so the correct answer here is probably going to be this one here, because if you round it. Okay. Alright, now if you have any questions about this one here, please leave something in the comments as well. If you want me to show you how to do this by hand, send me a message. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope this helps you out during your external exam season. Okay. I will see you guys in the next video where I do short response.